Hello. It has been a while. Welcome back. This is the first film recorded episode of Perspective, so you get to see what I look like. But to be totally honest, this is like the most professional setup ever because we're in an actual recording studio. I know I managed to pull a few strings to make this happen. Trust me, what normally happens is I am in a very similar setup without makeup on, without my fancy jacket and all that sort of stuff. I'm under a duvet, speaking into a microphone like this to try to muffle the sound. That is what a normal episode of Perspective is like. This is reality, but it's not like... It's not the daily life. So I'm not going to be looking at you for most of this. I'm going to be reading off my screen and kind of blanking you. I'm going to confidently call this season 2, and the plan is to cover another 5 countries before I combust. Hopefully season 3 will not have as long a break between episodes, but also seasons. It was a little bit of an exceptional year. I don't think I was really prepared for how long these would take, to be totally honest. The first episode of these series I have decided, because season 1 started with the United Kingdom, I get to pick, so I don't have to go in alphabetical order. Let's be honest, I will be picking ones that I know relatively intimately because A, it's less work as I get into it, and B, it gives me a little bit of a boost. I love doing these, but there's a lot of work that goes into them in the background, and having that injection of, oh yeah, I can chat a bit of nonsense about my experience, it really does help to reinvigorate. And by the way, if the camera goes a bit blurry, I'm told that might happen, so sorry in advance, not a lot I can do about it. With full transparency, I've got a GPT to help me compile some of the info here because this is an extra special episode we're recording in an actual studio, and I didn't want to pass that up, so I had to get things together pretty quickly. It's very, very exciting, but I will announce those parts in advance. They're normally the ones that take me a bit of extra research time, i.e. the pod history and a bit of the mythology and folklore. But yeah, we'll talk about that. Without further ado, we are hopping to a completely new continent for the very first time. Cue my accent, which is apparently on the verge of New Zealand. Sorry. Australia! I keep harping on about this, but we lived in Melbourne for 9 months and it was amazing. So I do have some anecdotes sprinkled here and there on this piece of fairy bread. This might squeeze my energy out a little bit, so maybe I'll stop talking about it so much. Doubtful. A quick note on respectful terminology. I'll be using the term First Nations here to show my respect for the peoples who were present on the landmass before the European invasion. The research I've pasted in hasn't done this, so if I miss a couple when reading my notes, I'm really sorry, it is a mistake. I will try to catch them. The reason I'm steering away from the word Aboriginal is in part because its use, in my understanding, has come from around the time of the Australian invasion, and it just doesn't seem appropriate. From the research I've done, not GPT'd, it also seems to be the preferred term from the people themselves, so I will go by that guidance. I am not currently in Australia, I'm in London, but something I really liked about the reconciliation attempts day-to-day was acknowledgement before important meetings and events. Therefore, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, their continuing connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to them, their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. I hope I'm close enough to this mic. I was close before and then it got a bit too tinny, so that's why I'm a little bit further away. Location. Now, Nations Online loves Australia. Okay, this is a direct quote. Some say, with Australia, you get it all. A continent with its own tectonic plate, a country with a population density others can only dream of, and a massive island with a 30,000 kilometre long beach. I mean, like... Factually, Australia is situated entirely in the southern hemisphere between the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, south of maritime Southeast Asia, and north of the Antarctic. We actually almost went to the Antarctic. No, we didn't. That's a complete lie. We went to the Antarctic station in New Zealand. We met some huskies. That was exciting. That's a New Zealand episode, though I've kind of spoiled it now. The shape. Now, without a lie, looked at the map, 360 degrees. I tried to turn it left, right and centre, but like, it just looks a bit like a blob, right? I can maybe just about see some sort of woodlouse or pill bug with a bit of a mohawk, maybe something like that, or a Pokemon or Digimon, or, controversially perhaps, a bean on fire. Just think about it. Some tourist tap, by the way, has basically Australia and then Tassie's little heart at the bottom, and I really like that, and I can't see past that. So I'm going to leave it at being on fire, but those are my findings. In terms of climate, the Australian continent covers a large range of climate zones from the tropics in the north to the arid interior and temperate regions of the south. Overall, it is the driest of all inhabited continents, with considerable rainfall and temperature variability both across the country and from year to year. Now, the geography, coastal population concentrations and biodiversity render Australia particularly vulnerable to small variations in climate. There is a really, really interesting, I don't know what it's called, but basically pollution, airflow, airway, I don't know. Pollution kind of, I hope this is right, I hope it's not fake news, but it kind of, at the equator, there is a belt that's really hard for wildlife and airflow to get past. So most of the pollution seems to be concentrated in the northern hemisphere because that's where most of the industrialization is. And then the southern hemisphere seems to be a lot cleaner. And they also, by the way, managed to fix that hole in the ozone layer. That was very exciting. Of course, the rest of the stuff is still going on, and we're going to get to that later. But I just thought it was really, really interesting about the air quality and so on around Australia without having the push down from the northern hemisphere. And also, it is so strange going, oh, it's so much sunnier up north. For me, someone in the northern hemisphere going, north is cold, south is hot, whereas in Australia, south is cold, north is hot. It's very confusing. The terrain is mostly low plateau with deserts and fertile plain in the southeast. In terms of elevation, the highest point, I'm really going to butcher this, Mount Kosciuszko, 2,228 metres high, and the lowest point is Lake Erie, minus 15 metres, that makes more sense. The mean elevation is 330 metres. I haven't got a foot in here because, again, very low for time. In terms of regions, there are 8 states and territories. So 6 states, 2 territories, each with its own unique geography, culture and history. Now, I'm going to gloss over a lot of this. I'm going to give you the states and their capitals, but we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a state and a territory because I didn't know. The states are New South Wales, the capital of Sydney, is the most populous state. Number 2, Victoria. Melbourne is the capital of Victoria. That's where we lived for 9 months. And if there is anything positive to say about a place, then Melbourne goes, that's us. So coffee capital, culture capital, food capital, all of these things are really positive. And you just go, oh, Melbourne. And it's not me making that up. Honestly, it's absolutely ridiculous. It's a running joke for me. I don't know if it is in general, but it's a little bit like watching you. Number 3 is Queensland and the capital is Brisbane. Then there's Western Australia and the capital is Perth. Weirdly, when you speak to Australians on the east coast, you ask about Perth and they go, I've never been, I've heard really bad things. So they've been to Bali and stuff. That's a very traditional destination for Australian holidaymakers. But yeah, Perth, apparently it's really, really nice. The people who have been there, they rave about it. But everyone else is like, oh, don't know where that is. That's really weird. It is quite expensive to fly to Perth as well. Number 5, South Australia. The capital is Adelaide. Have been there. Went to see the comedy festival, actually. That was all right. Number 6 is Tassie, Tasmania, capital of Hobart. And that is a teeny tiny island at the bottom under Melbourne. Have not been there. They do amazing cherries when it's cherry season. Like, you get massive boxes of them. I got massive boxes of them. I think they were $10 or £5 for a couple of kilos. It was really, really good. And maybe, did they go up? I can't remember. I remember they were not the cheapest thing, but also they were so good when it was seasonal. Can I beat a Tassie cherry? Number 7, Australian Capital Territory, and the capital of the capital is Canberra. It's within New South Wales, but I think the background is both Sydney and Melbourne were vying for capital, and they were both pretty big. And they couldn't decide which one was going to be the capital. So they drew a line, and in the middle, they were like, right, the capital's there, and that's Canberra. But it is absolutely piddly. I've heard it's not amazing to go to. We didn't actually end up going there. But yeah, it was chosen as capital in 1908 as a compromise. See, even the GPT information is telling me that. Number 8 is Northern Territory, and the capital is Darwin. The difference between a state and a territory in Australia lies in their level of self-governance and constitutional status. States have their own constitution, parliament, judiciary. They have more autonomy to make laws without federal interference. And then the territories basically they can have Canberra override their laws. That's it in a nutshell. The time zone of Australia at the time of recording is Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So it is 11 hours ahead of Greenwich Meridian Time. Now, I am pretty sure it goes 11, then it aligns for a little bit, because I think there's maybe like a week or so between when they shift their daylight hours and we do, and then it's 12 hours, and then it flips to 13 hours. I think I've got that right. I could be totally lying to you, but I'm pretty sure at one point we had like 13-hour difference when we were calling home. That could be because we'd moved country, but it's either 11 or 12 hours, possibly 13 if I'm right. I'm not certain that I'm right on that one. The 2021 population was 25,688,000. that is 0.33% of the global 700 something, tell you what, 7,864,924,000. I think it's trillion. I think it's 7 trillion. No, it's billion. It's blimmin' billion. It is 0.33% of the global 7.9 billion people. And that is 0.38 times the UK. So for every 10 Brits, you've got 3 adult Aussies and a teenager. Because a teenager is 0.8 of an adult. The landmass in kilometres squared, this is going to make you cry a little bit, 7,692,020. That is 0.005165% of the world's landmass. Now, I don't know why I'm still using that statistic, but now it's tradition. So that is a piddly amount, right? But it is 3,151% of the UK, so 32 times as big as the UK, 1,106% of Texas's landmass, so 11 times Texas's landmass, and the people per kilometre squared, 3. Okay, 3. Remember, the UK has 278 people per kilometre squared. That is loco, right? Remember that a lot of them will be concentrated around the coast. That's kind of the way that Australia works. But that is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. We're on to my favourite, but also the most difficult part, which is potted history. A quick note on cultural sensitivity. Because of bereavement practices, images, voices, and names of deceased persons can trigger sadness or distress for some First Nations cultures. My generated research doesn't have any that I've noticed. I really have generated it, whizzed through it, and then this is where I am, right? I wanted to get you something out. It's exciting, but I am really sorry if I've missed any. But that is the reason you'll see that message if you go on some Australian websites. And it's worth being aware of, because it's a level of respect for ancestors that we don't necessarily have, or we have it in a different way. And I think part of the point of this podcast is being able to reframe your expectations and experiences in line with other people's, because even though we think there's a lot going on in Western culture, there's not there's a lot of other people out there. So it is worth bearing in mind. Another anecdote, before we left Melbourne, I tried to look for a map of Melbourne before the invasion to hang up at home, and I wanted to support the appropriate people. There are lots of bits of tourist hat that says made in China with an Australian type design on it. It might have a sticker that says licensed print from the original artist, but we just thought that was a bit naff, really. Did a bit of research, and the descendants of invaders having access to First Nations maps is a really sensitive subject, because there's understandably a lot of resentment there, and by having access to these maps, you're demanding access to their sensitive secrets, really. I'm not saying this very eloquently, but you know what I mean. It's the equivalent of Russia having a copy of Google Maps live traffic data, so they turned that off for the invasion. There's a reason for that. Basically, there's a load of information in what I see as a pretty image. I know that you know this, but basically it is really important to educate yourself and be respectful, and that was an example of where I needed to do just that. I didn't come home with a really beautiful print of Melbourne in the traditional style, but you know what? It's not fair for me to go to somebody else's home and demand their IP, their intellectual property. That is not okay, both in modern times and also if somebody wanted, if they come into my home and demanded blueprints, that would not be okay. I would not be comfortable with that. And that's also to say that the stuff that we're looking at is what's available on the internet. I suspect there are a load of more specific stories out there of the history of the land, but again, we need to respect people's right to privacy and their right to respect their histories in their own way. That may not be sharing it on Western internet. With that in mind, we're delving into the brief history of Australia in, to quote GPT, 20 key bullet points. I will jump around these bullet points, they're not going to be 20. We'll start off in the pre-colonial, or invasion era. The First Nations people have been on what we call the Australian continent for... This is where I pause. So around the internet, it's touted as 65,000 years, so over 65,000 years. And that is a very big number. And they attribute it to Mungo Man, if I'm saying that right, and woman. But there's been some question about the dating of this site. Regardless, that's very blimmin' old. The Mungo Man was discovered in 1974 at Lake Mungo in New South Wales. It was estimated to be around 42,000 years old as of one study. 65,000 is being thrown around in other studies. I don't know which is the right answer. I want it to be the right number, but I don't want to overstate it. And that's probably why we've got such a vast range, because it's hard to date these things. Mungo Man is one of the oldest anatomically modern human remains found in Australia. Mungo Lady was found in 1969. This information, by the way, is from Adelaide University, so I trust it a fair amount. These remains support the deep antiquity of the First Nations beliefs and their sophisticated cultural practices, and also help our understanding of human migration. If you think about the amount of time that those people have had on that land, they have developed complex societies with diverse languages, over 250 individual languages with over 800 diverse dialects. There are customs and spiritual beliefs connected to the land, and the knowledge of agriculture, aquaculture, which is really fun, and fire management, such as fire stick farming. All of that has really shaped the Australian landscape. Now, I read a book. It's by a slightly controversial figure who I can't remember the name of, but basically the premise of it was there are a lot of things that the First Nations people did to the land in order to, do crop rotation, all that sort of stuff. And yes, they didn't build it up in terms of Western cities, because it's a different version of what civilization looks like. But you're basically taking away farmland and losing the knowledge of that landscape, because what the First Nations people did was they were able to protect it and not have this massive barren view of the continent, which is kind of happening today. There's a lot of fires going on. It's one of the big things that you see when it comes to summer. It's like, okay, the wildfires are there, but with controlled burning and being able to, recycle the soil and get all like that. I don't know where I'm going with this. There are seeds that will only spread after the plant has burned. All of these things have come about because of that really sensitive relationship between the humans on it and the agriculture. And when the Europeans came in, they kind of blitzed it, right? As they did horrible things to the local populations and horrible things to their agricultural practices. And therefore, the land management is really hard nowadays. So I think the first thing that I want you to be aware of is that we definitely have evidence of the local people doing all of these things. The aquaculture, there's sites. This is where I'm showing that I really haven't done as much research into this as I wanted to in order to give you the evidence here. But there's, what's it called? There's like rock walls in a river that the First Nations people were using to trap fish. And it's really, really clever, and they can only go one way through or something, but they were surviving, they were thriving, they were working with the landscape, and it was a more harmonious relationship than we have currently. We'll talk a little bit about the dream time or the dreaming, and that's the foundation of the First Nations spirituality and storytelling. It explains the creation of the world, ancestral beings, and the laws that govern life. According to these stories, powerful spiritual beings shape the land, rivers, and skies, creating animals and people. These stories are passed down through oral traditions, ceremonies, and rock art, and they vary between different language groups. The dream time is not just history, but an ongoing connection between people, nature, and spirits. Sacred sites such as Uluru are deeply tied to dreamtime stories, and it reinforces the profound bond these people have with their land. Now, you may think that it's quite a big landscape, and people are just kind of doing their own thing locally, moving around a little bit. But actually, there was maritime trade. Before the Europeans came over, the First Nations people had well-established trade networks, including contact with Makassar fishermen from Sulawesi in Indonesia. From at least the 1600s, the Makassans travelled to northern Australia, particularly Arnhem Island, in search of trepang or sea cucumbers, and they were really highly valued in Chinese markets. Local communities traded items such as pearls, turtle shells, and knowledge of the land in exchange for metal tools, tobacco, and cloth. This exchange influenced local languages, customs, and technologies. The Moccasin visits were peaceful and seasonal, and they left a lasting impact on northern culture and history. Now we come to the European invasion. In 1606, Dutch explorer Willem Janszoon became the first recorded European to land in Australia, and that was on the west coast of Cape York Peninsula. I don't know where that is. In 1642, I assume Abel Tasmania. He is a Dutch navigator and charted parts of Tasmania and New Zealand, but he didn't settle. In 1770, James Cook claimed Australia. So he was a British explorer, and he mapped the east coast and claimed it for Britain under the name New South Wales, hence the state. In 1788, the first fleet arrived, and that was led by Governor Arthur Phillip. Now, they established a penal colony at Sydney Cove on January 26th, which, by the way, is now Australia Day, and for obvious reasons, it isn't really celebrated like it is, but there's a lot of issues and flags around it being celebrated because it's not a celebration for the First Nations people. I've had a few questions about how many people nowadays are related to the convicts, and it's not that many, right? It's 20% of modern Aussies descend from convicts, including my uncle, by the way, who married in. It must be said that a convict could even be someone who, in an Aladdin-esque fashion, stole an apple because they were hungry. It wasn't just your Class A serial killer murderers that were sent to Australia. It was a different time. In 1829, Western Australia was established, so Perth was founded as a British settlement, marking further colonial invasion. Now, I found it really difficult. I think I can kind of sort it out in my head now, but to me, Perth is a place in Scotland. And it's really weird that there's a Perth in the Southern Hemisphere. You go, oh yeah, that's Perth. And then you go, oh no, that's Perth, Australia. I take serious issue with how this next bit has been written in the history books. In the 1830s, First Nation resistance and dispossession, the Black War in Tasmania, and other conflicts led to significant First Nations population decline due to violence and disease. In the 1850s, the Australian gold rush started. So New South Wales, they discovered some gold, and Victoria as well. There's a massive influx of migrants and economic growth. From 1855 to 1890, there was quite a lot of self-governance. Australia is really far away from the UK, so you had to have your own governments there really in order to control locally. As we've hinted at, both Victoria and New South Wales led the way, hence the marginal conflict between the two. 1868 marked the end of convict transportation, so the last convicts were sent to Western Australia. In terms of quantity, there were 160,000 people transported to the colonies in 80 years. We have skidded our way up to the 20th century. On the 1st of January 1901, I've just realised that's not as perfect as I thought. I thought it was 1900, and I would be like, if you're going to choose a date, the first day of January in a new century is a really good time to do that. But no, I guess they had the whole year to prep. Anyway, the 6 British colonies united to form the Commonwealth of Australia, an independent dominion within the British Empire. GPT reckons nothing happened between 1901 and the First World War. So next up, we have the First World War. Australia fought on Britain's side, and there were significant losses of Australians at Gallipoli and on the Western Front. April the 25th is Anzac Day, so that is the day for the armed forces of Australia and New Zealand. And Anzac cookies are really tasty. That's all I have on that one. I would definitely try an Anzac cookie. I mean, they have to be made right, but it's a cookie. It's like a flapjacky cookie. It's nice. Australia also fought in World War II alongside the Allies. I'm not a massive fan of the recent history, in part because people are still living it. But I didn't really know too much about the Pacific element of the Second World War. So the particular battles that have been highlighted here are the 1942 bombing of Darwin by Japan and the Kokoda campaign in Papua New Guinea. They were apparently major events that were fought, and I can only imagine how horrific they were. Post-war, 1945 to 1970s, there was an immigration boom, and Australia welcomed large numbers of European immigrants, including displaced people from World War II. I imagine World War I as well. In 1967, there was a referendum, and this is being lauded as a landmark vote which led to constitutional changes allowing First Nations peoples to be counted in the census and granted federal government powers to legislate for them. That's 50 years ago. I find that absolutely disgusting. And then it was only in 1992, the Mabo decision, where the High Court of Australia recognised First Nations land rights, overturning the idea of terra nullius, so the land belongs to no one. This sort of thing is so frustrating because if it was the other way around, you wouldn't hear the end of it. There would be a massive war, a ton of resentment, probably all of that stuff is like brewing, and the patience and kindness of the First Nations Australians at this point, or the fact that they're just having to cope with it, it's just so unfair. I don't know what the answer is because there isn't an answer because it's all happened. But this is why I find especially the more modern stuff so tricky, because you can't look back in retrospect and go, that was the right answer. The only thing I can say is I am sorry. In the dawn of the new millennium, Australia has grown into a major economy facing issues such as First Nations reconciliation, climate change, and relations with Asia. Now, we'll get onto that a little bit more in a minute, but I found that really interesting. I've said that maybe 20 times here. I always seem to end potted history on such a negative, and that's because we're going chronologically, and I'm disillusioned. Let's get on to general info. Even with the potential of all that kind of belt, the nature and air doesn't pass, that I don't know is 100% correct, the air quality exceeds 1 to 2 times the WHO recommended levels of pollutants, so that's not ideal, but it's not the worst we've had. Human Development Index is 0.95, which is pretty good. World Happiness Report, they got 7.095, so 12th place globally. That's pretty good. Median age is 36.95. The top 10 causes of death are what you'd mostly expect from a more developed Western type economy. In first place, you've got coronary heart disease, then Alzheimer's and dementia. 3 is lung cancer. There is quite a lot of smoking in Australia. That's definitely something that I realised when I was over there. A lot of people were smoking, whereas in the UK, that has definitely gone down since the bans. Number 4 is stroke, then 5 lung disease linked with the smoking, I think. 6 is breast cancer, 7 prostate cancer, 8 colon rectum cancers, and then number 9 is suicide. I'm going to link some resources in the show notes if you are feeling like you need help or to talk to somebody. There is always somebody there that you can talk to. Please reach out and there will be a helping hand there for you. Briefly on this, because it's not something that we normally see in these top 10. Education is important. It seems to be in rural areas. Men are 3 times more likely to go down this route than women in this instance. And also access to guns may be an issue. We will talk about that in a little bit. But also we cannot understate the impact that, in the 1900s, and again, GPT glossed over this, but there was a massive, massive drive to split up First Nations communities. And that level of identity theft can really, really mess with you. Not having that background, not knowing who you are, where you want to go, what's important, that can really affect you. And then number 10 is diabetes. The average Australian is overweight/obese. The average BMI for a man is 27.6 and for a woman is 26. And remember, 25 is the upper limit here. But this calculation is flawed, but the general trend is that there's access to a lot of junk foods and then people are overeating. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the average height of a woman is 161.8 centimetres or 5'3.5", and the average height for a man is 175.6 centimetres or 5'9". Now, I've got 2 comments on this. Number 1, I heard an evolutionary theory, probably from Lindsay Nolke, and it's that the colder it is, the bigger the animals get, and then the warmer it is, the smaller the people get. And the animals. Melbourne is super multicultural, and I met some people there who are amazing friends, and they are teeny tiny. I'm 5'6", 5'7", about 170 centimetres, and they were so much shorter than me. And I'm normally alright in a crowd, because I'll just push through. I'm not a small woman, but they were saying to me, they were going out and they were feeling a bit concerned for their safety because they're quite short. And I was just like, I can completely understand that, because when I'm next to really tall men, and there's not normally that many really tall men around me, it's quite concerning. So to be proportionally that much smaller, it must be part of your day-to-day thinking. So what I'm trying to say is I think there's quite a variation in the heights. I don't think it's that everybody's sitting pretty at 5'3" or 5'9". To be fair, I'm tall for a woman there, but I think there's some people who are shorter, some who are taller. Average hair colour is brown, average eye colour is brown. Country background, we've kind of glossed over this a fair amount, but we'll dot our I's and cross our T's. The nation of Australia was founded in 1901. The flag used by Australian government symbolises Australia's history as a British colony and its status as a member of the Commonwealth. So what you've got is the Union Jack on there, Southern Cross, which is some stars, and the Commonwealth Star as well. There are two First Nations flags that Australia used. For want of a better word here, there's the Aboriginal flag and then there's the Torres Strait Islanders flag. But together they are First Nations people. I'm going to talk about the Aboriginal flag. Imagine a rectangle bisected horizontally. At the top you've got black and the bottom you've got red, and in the centre of that there is a yellow circle. The black represents the First Nations people of Australia, the yellow represents the sun, which gives life and protects, and then the red represents the red earth, red ochre, and the spiritual connection to the land. National symbols are the Uluru, which is that rock formation. I think it's in the middle of Australia. It's quite hard to get to. You have to go there with that in mind. Kangaroo, koala, general wildlife, Great Barrier Reef, Sydney Opera House, the Outback, Ned Kelly, Melbourne represent. General financials, the currency is the Australian dollar, or Ausla, and there's about 2 to 1 GBP. A gold bar of 12.5 kilos is 1,191,865 Auslas, about 600k GBP. Real GDP in 2021 was about 1.61% of the global GDP and 3.14 times the global average. So the total global GDP divided by the number of countries is a little bit over 3 times that. So it's quite a rich country. The composition of GDP, thank you CIA World Factbook. Agriculture's got 2.6%, industry 27.7%, and then services 63.6%. Gun ownership per 100, it's at number 51 on the list at 14.5 firearms per 100 people. Quite high comparatively. Obviously number 1 is America, but the main exports are coal, iron ore, natural gas, gold and wheat as of 2022. The main export partners, China is coming in at number 1, 29%. Then Japan, 19%, South Korea, 10%, India, 7%, and Taiwan, 6%. The main imports, refined petroleum, cars, garments, trucks and plastic products. And the import partners are China, 28%, the US, 10%, South Korea, 6%, Japan 6% and Singapore 5%. The makeup of the energy consumed, 65.5% is fossil fuels, 15.2% solar, 12% wind, 6.3% hydroelectric, and biomass and waste is 1.1%. In terms of electrification, 100% of the population has access to electricity. Water access is touted at 100%, but remote Australians don't have it because the infrastructure is really difficult to do. So another source, fluencecorp.com, basically said that 93% have access to clean, safe water. But it's a high percentage. We're on to personal financials. The average house price is about $959,300. So best part of $1 million, right? That's about 500,000 GBP or 600,000 US dollars. The average salary is 100,000 Auslers, 50k GBP, 60k US dollars. I've got some very simple multiples there, just as an estimate, you know. And the take home is about 75% of your income. So that also includes the Medicare levy, which is a payment that you make to the government to fund your national health service, basically. That means that you take home about 75,000 Auslers. If you were taking your complete salary after tax and paying off a house, it would take you 13 years to repay that house, excluding interest. We're not making it complicated here. But the cost of living for one person in the city centre is about 1,600 Auslers for food, amenities, that sort of thing, and then about 2,000 for rent. If, again, you're staying in the city centre, there are things you could do. But that means that if you were to adjust your income for the expenses, it would take you 32 years to pay off that house as a single person. Trading Economics reckons 66% of Australians own their own house, and car ownership is clocking in at 77% as of 2019. Let's take a look at the legal landscape, starting off with gender parity. You can probably tell in my voice that I do not have good news for you. The number that Australia has for gender parity is 0.738. They're number 43 in the world, and that is pretty poor. It's behind a lot of countries we've not been to yet, including some in, for example, Africa and South America that I'd clearly misguidedly assume that wouldn't be the case. To be honest, this whole thing it's not entirely unexpected, right? So I experienced sexism in the workplace for the very first time ever that I'd noticed in Australia. It wasn't awful, but it was there. And that was weird, like genuine sexism, like talking about how I was at a disadvantage because I was a woman. I've never had that before, right? Obviously very privileged to have not had that before, but equally not privileged because you would think it would be automatic because men and women are equal mentally. In fact, I'm not going to go off on this one. When I was working in Australia, we had some people come in to do a self-defense class, and the talk that they gave us was really quite jarring. Basically, the bottom line is, and I don't think it's unfair per se, but it's horrible to hear, if a man comes in to attack you, they will beat you. So you have to attack them in a way that you make yourself time enough to get away. That is horrific. Honestly, being told that mentally is quite shaking. And I'm not a small woman, right? I'm quite a big woman comparatively, especially compared to my 5'3" friends. And I'm perfectly happy to give someone a whack. But part of this talk, they were saying about do not be afraid to hit them, because if they are bringing a fight to you, you can play dirty. There are no rules to this. You attack them and you get away. It's just the need for that talk is something that is really quite difficult to reconcile yourself to, because it shouldn't have to be happening. But it's there. Australia's legal system is a common law system. It's very influenced by the legal traditions of England due to the colonial history, the invasion history. Next up, it's time to suffer through suffrage. In 1855, there were the first voting rights in New South Wales, so men gained the right to vote for members of the colonial legislature, but it was property-owning men, not First Nations men. It was a very small group of people who could actually vote. In 1894, South Australia implemented universal male suffrage. It doesn't say anything about First Nations, but it does say universal. So I want to believe that First Nations men were included there. Obviously, I want to believe that everybody was included there and that everybody's had the right to vote forever because we're all democracy, blah, blah, blah. In 1901, when the Commonwealth of Australia was formed, then all white men aged 21 and over were allowed to vote, and then some First Nations men were, depending on whether they'd fought in the war and were already on the electoral state or something, but that was a bit crap. In 1902, Australia became the second country in the world after New Zealand to introduce women's suffrage. White women were allowed to vote in 1902. In 1962, so 60 years after women were given the right to vote, then the First Nations, Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders were granted the right to vote, but it was only 1967, so 5 years after that, they were fully included in the census, so had equal voting rights in all states and territories. 1973, the voting age was reduced to 18. It's only in 1984 that all Australian citizens, regardless of gender, race or socioeconomic status, were granted the right to vote in all federal, state and local elections. The only thing I can do here is shake my head. It's so recent and so frustrating. The current Prime Minister of Australia is Anthony Albanese. He became Prime Minister in 2022, but I think he's been a Member of Parliament since 1996, so he's been around for a while. The monarchy, because it's a part of the British Commonwealth, then they've got Charles II. My name is Charles II. I love the people and the people love me so much that they restored the English monarchy. I'm part Scottish, French, Italian, a little bit Dane, but 100% party animal. Champagne! Spaniels I adore, named after me too. Like me, they were fun with a nutty hairdo. It's the day of my birthday, I can't recall. Let's have a party anyway, because I love a Mars pool. Charles III. Charles III is the current monarch. I always forget about Charles II, and I shouldn't, because I love the people and the people love me. You know what I haven't done? I haven't actually written in my notes what the most popular languages are in Australia. I can tell you English is, and Mandarin, and the other Chinese languages are as well. And because the invaders are such a big population now, that's why it's those European and Chinese languages instead of the First Nations ones. So I'm going to use this time to talk about the First Nations languages. We talked about how there were 250 plus languages with 800 plus dialects. The most widely spoken First Nations Australian language today is, I'm so sorry, Yolngu Matha, a group of languages spoken by the Yolngu people in northeastern Arnhem Land in Northern Territory. There are language revitalisation efforts, But I think that it's very easy to fall into a habit of going, the easiest way to speak to somebody is through a common language that we have, and then you lose that other language. They really do need to be preserved in quite a special way, because reading it is one thing, but being able to pronounce it is something totally different. I fear that I'm butchering quite a lot of this pronunciation. We're going to count to 10 in Yolngu with pronunciation guidance. I haven't heard this, right? But it is guidance. I'm sorry if I missed the mark. Ngara, marama, tau, ngakun, lima. And that is actually a loan word. Number 5 is a loan word from the Austronesian languages, like Indonesian and Malay. Beyond 5, you say 5, 2, 5, 3, 5, 4. So we're going to do that. It's good practice for me. Lima ngara, lima marama, lima tau, lima ngakun, lima lima. That is hard when you're not used to it. Traditional dress. There isn't an official traditional dress here, but there's some things that you maybe think about. And it is post-invasion. There's the Akubra hat, that's the wide-brimmed felt hat, the bushranger outfit, casual clothing, Australian Football League jersey, the bather or swimsuit. First Nations traditional clothing varies widely. There's not necessarily loads of it because the climate's quite hot. Things like body paint jewellery, ceremonial items, feathers, shells, woven fibre garments. And remember, Australia is the size of Europe. It's like saying, what's the traditional dress of Europe? There isn't one, there's multiple. Tourist attractions, I probably don't even have to tell you these. So Uluru, Great Barrier Reef, Sydney, the Opera House, the Great Ocean Road, all of these things, they will ring a bell when you say about Australia. In an absolutely hilarious twist that I haven't edited out, when I asked GPT for famous Australian male authors, it came up with Patrick White, Tim Winton, Richard Flanagan, Colleen McCulloch, who is a woman, right? And Miles Franklin. That's fantastic. And then famous Australian female authors, Kate Grenville, Helen Garner, Geraldine Brooks, Toni Morrison, and Leanne Moriarty, as well as Colleen McCulloch. So we've got 6 and 4, which I am very happy about. I haven't heard of any of those authors, so I can't give you a book context. Stereotypes. This is always a little bit weird when I get to this section. I really like having it in because you don't have to take it as a negative. You can take it in the vein that it was meant and just go, oh, what is a caricature of the Australian character? Some examples of Australian stereotypes include lay back and relaxed, love for the outdoors and sport, use of slang and informal culture, arvo and bogan. Those are definitely used in everyday language. Arvo is afternoon, and it peed me off a bit because everyone kept saying, what are you doing this arvo? And like texting it. I think it was the texting that got me. I was just like, afternoon. It's an afternoon. Bogan is the equivalent of chav or redneck from my understanding. And it's just not very nice. But I think people are embracing it and calling themselves that, so it's taking a bit of the bite out. Drinking beer and eating meat. Australia is always hot. It is not always hot. It's not freezing. Don't get me wrong. There is no excuse, by the way, Melburnians, to have a puffer in the winter. I went all blimmin' winter without a puffer on. I know it's unseasonably warm. Mild is the correct term when it's not cold and not hot. But yeah, like it gets to double digits during the day. That is not cold by any stretch. No. It does get colder if you're not by the bay. I will grant you that one. But still, double digits in the day. Crocodile Dundee, Bushman, being obsessed with kangaroos and koalas. There aren't that many around, to be totally honest. There are like pockets, but they're not everywhere. And I stupidly was going into Australia expecting them to be everywhere, and there are loads of spiders and stuff. And it's just, that's not the way the world works normally. Australians all being surfer dudes, that's not the case. It is definitely popular along the eastern coast. They're seen as being fearless and tough. Maybe. I'll tell you what, a couple of people who are nervous about pollen season. My gosh, they stocked up on antihistamines like nobody's business. And then finally, ChatGPT has spat out the Aussie mate. So they're quite informal and stuff. Relatively, I think just like most people, there's always a line. You're like, this is the normal line. And then when you get closer to people, then you get further on that line. I don't think that's much different from most places, to be honest. We're going to finish up with one of my favourite bits, and that is myths and folklore. So ChatGPT has given me these 4 for your oral pleasure. I'm so tired. I've recorded like 4 videos today. Oh my gosh. Okay. So, the bunyip, that is a legendary water creature said to live in Australian billabongs, swamps and rivers. Descriptions vary, but is often depicted as a large, dark, amphibious beast with terrifying features. The bunyip is believed to punish those who disrespect nature. Some theories suggest it could be based on ancient memories of extinct Australian megafauna. Scary. Next up, the rainbow serpent is one of the most important figures in Aboriginal mythology. The rainbow serpent is a powerful creator being associated with water, storms and fertility. It is said to have carved out rivers and valleys as it moved across the land. It is both a giver of life and a destroyer, rewarding those who respect the land while punishing those who do not. I think the voice there was maybe a little bit dramatic considering that is linked to a creation myth, so take that with a pinch of salt. I'm just trying to be dramatic here. Now, we have something that is a little bit more recent. The Min Min lights. The mysterious floating light phenomenon reported in outback Australia, particularly in Queensland. The lights appear to follow travellers at night and disappear when approached. Some believe that they are spirits of the dead, while others think they are caused by natural gases or optical illusions. That's boring. Despite scientific theories, the Min Min lights remain a mystery. And then, number 4. The drop bear. The drop bear is said to be a giant carnivorous koala that drops from trees to attack unsuspecting people, especially tourists. While completely fictional. Oh no, you ruined it, ChatGPT. While completely fictional, Australians often use the myth to play pranks on visitors. Some joke that wearing Vegemite behind the ears or speaking with an Aussie accent can ward them off, and this is a tongue-in-cheek urban legend. Boring. It's real. The drop bear's real. Stock up on Vegemite. Oh wait, have I got more? Oh, I've got some folklore now. Oh, how exciting. Oh no, that is really good. Apart from the fact that I'm really tired. Tiddalik the frog, a story from southeastern Australia. Tiddalik was a frog that drank all the water in the world, causing a drought. The other animals had to make him laugh to release the water and teach the importance of sharing and consequences of greed. Understandably, we've got some European folklore mixed in amongst these. So first up, we've got the hairy man, which is a myth originating from early European invaders. This creature is often described as a large humanoid figure covered in hair, believed to inhabit the remote bushland, similar to Bigfoot. The hairy man is a figure of mystery and fear. Had to be done in Scottish. Then there's the nanny goat of Ballarat, which is a strange tale from the gold rush in Ballarat, where it was said a nanny goat would appear at night helping people in need. It was considered both a supernatural guardian and a symbol of good fortune. Bush rangers and outlaw legends. Ned Kelly. He is perhaps Australia's most famous folk hero. I've mentioned him already. He was a bush ranger in the 19th century, 1800s. He became a symbol of resistance against colonial authority, especially after donning homemade armour and leading an infamous final stand. His story is entwined with Australian identity and rebellion. He also had a gang called the Kelly Gang. From the Australian outback, we have 2, and they kind of look to be the same. This is how much time I've had to review this before we're recording. So first up, the legend of the dingo. The dingo is Australia's wild dog, and it holds a special place in folklore, often viewed as both a symbol of donga. Sorry, I've watched 9 recently. Danger. And an integral part of the landscape. The most famous dingo-related tale is the story of Azaria Chamberlain, a young girl allegedly taken by a dingo, sparking national debate in court cases. Oh, that was a horrible one. We've got some folklore from the Australian outback that I'm editing as I'm reading it. So GPT has called this the wondrous dog of the outback, and I can only assume it means a dingo because dingoes are the native dogs as far as I know. So it's a tale from First Nations folklore, and it describes a magical shape-shifting dingo. I need to protect myself against the drop bear, sorry. Dingo that helped guide people across harsh deserts, protecting them from danger. The story symbolises loyalty, guidance and survival in the harsh outback. I'm so sorry. I need to protect myself from the drop bear. It's very important. I love this. I'm going to try to amalgamate these two. We've got the European folklore of the hairy man, which is basically Bigfoot, right? But then the Australian version is Yowie. The legend of the Yowie is a large ape-like creature said to inhabit the dense forests of the eastern states. Sightings of the Yowie have been reported for centuries. The creature has become a popular figure in modern folklore, often used to explain mysterious disappearances or strange events in the wild. But also, Yowie is like a Freddo, right? So you can get a little chocolate bar from Cadbury's, but also a Yowie is a bit like a Kinder Egg. So you get this chocolate shell with a Yowie face on it, and then inside you've got a toy. And I am very biased. I'm not a fan of Australian chocolate, right? The reason for that is they put chemicals in it, additives. Oh my gosh, they put chemicals in the bad candy. But they put it in them to stop them melting. And Cadbury's actually has a factory in Tasmania. And I can taste the difference between the chocolate a little bit. It's not awful. But the other reason I have such an issue with Australian chocolate is Tim Tams, okay? I'm going to post a video very soon where I compare a penguin, as in a penguin, to a Tim Tam. And you know what? We'll look at it then, okay? I have issues. That is all we have for now on Australia. Next up, alphabetically, we're going back to our regularly scheduled listening and we're going to visit Angola. We're not going to be probably in the beautiful studio this time, so I hope you've enjoyed this while it's here. I hope the sound quality has been absolutely exceptional and that it's music to your ears. But you know what? I'm afraid you're just going to have to lump it. If you want to learn about all these places, you're just going to have to cope with my sound quality or lack thereof. At least you can hear my voice. Can you imagine? Jeez. If I was born a few centuries ago, I would just be talking to myself in a room. And I would not be one of those poshos that could do it. So I would be on a pig farm talking to myself. I mean, the pigs would probably talk back. Anyway, that is a rabbit hole that we do not need to go down. I need to stop talking. There will not be a camera next time because, again, I'll probably be under a duvet going, hello, welcome. It's not a professional setup by any stretch. See you next time. Have a great day and remember to keep a bit of perspective. Bye.